let's talk about religious freedom here, because I'm interested about, many people haven't seen the bill, so what the expectations are on it. Now, generally speaking, I am nervous about these sorts of things because what protects one faith, of course, protects all faiths and therefore is open to a level of interpretation that I have my issues with. We'll start with you first, Campbell. Obviously, as a potential senator, this would be something that you'd have to deal with in a parliament. Do you support the concept? Yep. And if so, how deep does it have to be? Because we all know the types of people we don't want to get screwed over by this.
Well, certainly support the concept. And the truism is that the devil's in the detail. Can I just sort of segue a bit sideways? On the weekend, we announced our Freedom Manifesto. We talked about an amendment to the Australian Constitution, unashamedly modelled on the US First Amendment, which would preserve free speech. And I think that's probably the overall principle we need. But just going back to the religious freedom, I mean, the Lib Dems, believe that, when we look at, say, the issue of, say, schools, we would have a problem if schools that receive government funding then discriminated against, say, teachers or students.
100%.
If they're non-government funded, if they're not government funded, if they're totally self-funded from the parents, whatever, we think they should be able to do whatever they darn well like. So that's just an aspect to it. I mean, the trouble is it is very complicated. There's a few thoughts.
Yeah, here's what the Education Minister had to say about that very issue, particularly in around Catholic schools and potential issues they may have with gay and lesbian kids. Here was Alan Tudge with LJ this morning.
But what if a Catholic school rejects a teacher because they're gay, for example? Where does the balance come out there?
Yeah, well, that wouldn't be lawful under our bill.
Okay.
So the bill will certainly allow religious schools to employ people of their own faith. Now, this is a critical principle at stake here because, Laura, you can't be a Catholic school if you can't can't employ Catholic teachers.
But now, look, Holly, I've got to say, I find it a bit weird that, look, there are no examples of teachers being rejected or kids being booted out of school, but obviously we want to make sure that there's a protection to make sure that that doesn't take place.
Absolutely.
The very same people who are worried about that are fighting against voter ID because there's no examples. Well, hang on, which is it? It's about protections. That's the point here, right? What do you see in it? Again, legislation to come, but what's your expectation about how this goes in the Parliament? Because remember, that crossbench, you can't get anything done without them.
Look, as you say, legislation to come. I haven't seen it. I obviously have my own very deep concerns when it comes to religious schools being able to enact their views on students, and I find it particularly abhorrent that a religious school would determine that a child who may be dealing with issues around their sexuality may be excluded, and I think that's something that we need to look at and make sure that those children are protected because they will be going through enough of their own struggles to then be put into a difficult position. When it comes to teachers, if a school wants to employ teachers of a particular faith, I have no problem with that. I think that's fine. My kids, when they started school, went to a Baptist school. We weren't Baptists, but they went to a Baptist school. All of the teachers were members of the Baptist church. Fine, all well and good. And you make the choice to send your children to that school.
What about the carve-out that Campbell's talking about here, which is if you're fully privately funded, then you can have your own rules?
Look, I understand what Campbell's saying, fully funded. I actually don't know if there are any schools that are fully funded. I don't know of many schools that don't have a handout for federal funding. So Campbell can make all these points about if you're independently funded, you can make your own decisions. There isn't a school that I know of that doesn't have the handout for federal or state funding. So therefore, you're taking money from the taxpayer. You have an obligation to all Australian citizens, and education is something there for all our children.
So, Richo, is there a trap here for Labor? If Labor turns around and says, no, even anywhere near this stuff, we're not going to go near it, because, of course, many of the minority ethnic communities, which have far stronger ties to faith than some other electorates, is there a problem for Labor if they don't back it?
I think there can be. I think Labor has to back it. I don't think there's much choice. Even if you don't like some aspects of it, it's very, very hard to knock this one back. When you do, what you're doing is knocking back a thing called freedom. Now, that's a very hard thing to say no to, because it's ingrained in all of us that freedom is a good thing.